Started. Good afternoon from the Hofburg in Vienna. Please allow me to start just with some technical announcements before we officially open the meeting of the General Committee on Democracy, Human Rights, and Humanitarian Questions. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and broadcasted live on the OSCPA's social media platforms and the website. In the interest of time, I will not repeat all of the technical details. We'll be following the same procedure as in the last few days. To ensure a smooth experience, I kindly ask all participants to please mute your microphones when not speaking. Similarly, please unmute your microphone when you are given the floor. We have 31 people signed up on the speakers list. As this already fills the time we have for this meeting, the speakers list has been closed. Due to the very high interest and our limited time available, all debate participants are requested to limit their interventions to 2 minutes. Finally, please turn on your video only when given the floor. If you keep your camera off, unless you're planning on making an intervention. With that, I will hand over to Mr. Kyriakos Hagiani, the chair of the committee, to please start the proceedings.
Thank you. Thank you, Andreas. Good afternoon to everybody. I welcome everybody to our meeting as Third General Committee. Colleagues, as you have seen, the agenda for our meeting has been circulated. I hope we can agree on this as a basis for our meeting. Thank you. You have already heard some technical information from Andreas Baker from the Secretariat. I have also asked Andreas to function as moderator for the debate parts of our meeting. This is the best way to assure a smooth procedure under these technical circumstances. We have a lot on our agenda and very little time. I ask everyone who intervenes to please pay attention to the timer, which will be visible on your screens. This will help ensure we can all engage in the discussion. With that, I will move to agenda item number 2. So, friends, it is a pleasure to see you again, or at least to almost see you again. We have a very busy schedule today, so I will not take very much time. However, I would like to inform you of some of the work that I and colleagues have been doing on your behalf in the past year. At our last committee meeting a year ago, we had an excellent debate focused on multilateralism in the field of human rights protection. Very soon after that, many of our countries were thrust into lockdowns and states of emergency. Not only were multilateral discussions challenged, but even our very basic discussions within Parliament became a struggle. Since that time, so much has changed. However, the human rights problems we discussed at that time have only continued. I was pleased that we could organize several webinars on important topics in the first months of lockdown. First, we look at how to respect human rights and maintain democratic control during states of emergency, and then we held a separate event focused on the challenges and opportunities in diverse societies presented by COVID. Thank you to all who contributed to these useful discussions. As you may have seen, we are also working on another event focused on humanitarian protection in conflict zones, which is a topic I feel is very important. I have particularly been in active touch with our colleagues in Armenia and Azerbaijan, stressing the importance of humanitarian protection in the areas impacted by the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. While travel to trouble spots has obviously not been an option, together with Michael Link and Kari Henriksen, I have continued to bring attention to human rights problems as they have occurred. On many occasions, our statements and communications have been done jointly. I think this is a strong sign on behalf of the committee, and I thank them both for their cooperation. We have at times and private contacts with officials in various countries. We do this in the hopes of having a constructive dialogue that can result in positive changes. We have only spoken out publicly when we thought it was particularly urgent and important to do so. In the face of persistent and grievous problems, I think this is our responsibility. Thank you for your attention. It has been a strange year, but I think we can be pleased with the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly's response and maintenance of our principles during this difficult period. I do not want to take more of our limited time, so we'll move now to agenda item 3. Presentation by Ms. Kari Henriksen, Norway, OSCE PA Vice President, Rapporteur of our third committee, on her ideas and intentions regarding her report for the 29th annual session in Bucharest in next July. Our rapporteur, Kari Henriksen, will now give us an initial overview of her intentions concerning her report for the upcoming annual session in July. Kari missed the opportunity to propose a resolution and report last year due to the cancellation of our session, but we look forward to see your work this year. You have the floor, Ms. Henriksen, and I ask you to please keep your comments within 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair Kyriakos, and thank you also to Michael and George for the excellent cooperation we have in this committee. It's good to see you all in these special times, and I hope you all really are in good health. We know that nothing is as it was. The consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic have been deep and will be long-lasting, with profound impact on the lives of all of our populations within and beyond the OSCE region. The pandemic has given most of us feelings of isolation, loneliness, fear, and powerlessness. These feelings and situations are well known as daily challenges for many persons also without the pandemic. For instance, women beaten by their spouses and raped by police, children beaten and mistreated by their parents, the use of violence against migrants and neglect of their basic needs, and journalists arrested and killed for their work. They are not vulnerable persons. It is the lack of capacity or will of our governments to protect and help them which creates the vulnerability. As parliamentarians, we have a responsibility to raise these issues in our own countries and fight for the human rights of all and to hold our governments to account. Responses to the pandemic have strained long-held human rights principles. In general, COVID has served as an amplifier of other challenges, and it is this I plan to explore in my report and resolution. I plan to focus on 5 groups of challenges and would like to reflect on some solutions to these in our final document. First, I will point to fleeing migrants, children and women as requiring our dedicated attention. Migrants are now faced with additional closure of borders, trafficking, violence, and serious threats to their well-being in migrant camps. The social and economic challenges are particularly hard on women and children. Increased domestic abuse due to lockdown orders and its consequences for women are problems we should find common solutions on. Second, COVID has brought us unprecedented stress on healthcare systems. I am sure that many of us have found our systems to be lacking. It is time that we recognize effective healthcare as a full-fledged human right. The state's responsibility to protect its population from health challenges is as important as the responsibility to protect our inhabitants against terror attacks and other hostile forces, also for people in prisons and migrant camps. Healthcare is therefore a critical aspect if our societies are to be resilient and secure. Third, we must continue to suggest solutions to the flight of people impacted by conflict. The fighting over Nagorno-Karabakh late last year resulted in thousands dead and countless others pushed out of their homes and otherwise impacted. The conflict in Ukraine is now entering its 7th year, and people in the conflict zone face daily hardship. In our efforts to find lasting settlements to the political challenges, the massive humanitarian consequences must be at the center of our attention. Fourth, the widespread lockdowns in response to COVID have clearly had direct impact on people's fundamental rights. Necessary limitations to our right to assembly is no justification for the crackdowns we have seen on peaceful protesters, for example, in Belarus, Russia, and in the United States during Black Lives Matter protests. Freedom and expression and the media is challenged. Detention and beatings of journalists and ordinary citizens for providing accurate information cannot be justified. We must take a more serious approach to freedom and expression on social media. Different platforms are used by violent and ideological groups for hate speech, corruption, sexual abuse, and to attack others, undermine democratic institutions, and spread fake news. I hope to see further work by our new representative on freedom of the media on this topic. But as parliamentarians, we must engage in broad political discussions and find solutions that both protect free speech and protect against discrimination, abuse, and persecution. And fifth, a person's identity, beliefs, expression of faith should be respected and celebrated and have their place in a broader society. Inclusive and tolerant societies bolster the foundations of democracy. The pandemic has impacted many of our democratic processes as imposition of states of emergency and numerous changes to election campaigns. Colleagues, our organization and our societies all face many challenges, but I hope we can work together to address these 5 priorities: protecting the most vulnerable, support and improve health systems, solve challenges for people in conflict zones, protecting fundamental rights for all, ensuring that our democracies are inclusive and resilient. Dear colleagues, as parliamentarians, we have all been entrusted by citizens to find solutions to such issues. We are the chosen ones, trusted the task to fulfill our common commitments. In this multilateral body, your experiences and suggestions is important to obtain our goals. Thank you for your attention. I would welcome any comments.
Thank you, Ms. Henriksen. We now have time for discussion on the presentation by Ms. Henriksen. I will ask Andreas Baker to please moderate this discussion. Due to our time constraints, I have set a speaking time of 2 minutes. Andreas, please call our first speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hajiani. The first speaker we call is Congressman Cohen from the United States, to be followed by Ms. Posio from Sweden, please. Mr. Cohen, you have the floor. Mr. Cohen, in that case, I will move directly to Ms. Posio from Sweden, please, to be followed by Ms. Samson Jan from Armenia.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Baker, and also thank you to Mr. Chair Hajiani and to Kari Henriksen for stressing multilateralism, but not least the necessity to reach gender equality. In OSCE, we, the member countries, have agreed upon the human rights. We have also signed the Agenda 2030 as members of the United Nations. But yet we have a long way to go until we reach the global goal on gender equality. Sweden has not been in war in over 200 years, and we have nearly 50% women in the parliament, but still women earn less than men. Women are still abused, both sexually and violently and psychologically. My 18-year-old daughter is unfortunately still afraid when she walks home from the tram when it's dark outside. We do need to work harder on this issue. And I have a very good example on how important it is to work with gender equality. In Sweden, the army has started to give free, what do you call it? When you have the period, protection for the period, it's given free for the women in the army, which is really good. And then they made the commercial that says that period is just as natural as ammunition, as if period, that is a sign of a newborn life, is the same as natural as ammunition that kills people, both women and children also. So I'm very grateful for Kari Henriksen for stressing gender equality, and I do hope that we all work and do our best in our parliaments to make sure that we can finally reach the goal. Thank you.
Ms. Boss. We'll then ask Ms. Samsonyan, followed by Mr. Frolov from Ukraine. Ms. Samsonyan, you have the floor, please.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, as you know, on September 27 last year, Azerbaijan, with the wide and direct assistance of Turkey and pro-Turkish terrorists from Syria, launched a huge military aggression on Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh. After about 44 days of war, a ceasefire was declared by a trilateral agreement signed on November 9 between Armenia, Russia, and Azerbaijan. Armenia has point by point fulfilled all its obligations under the agreement. One of the obligations for both parties was to exchange prisoners of war and civilian captives. So even if this point was not in the trilateral agreement, according to the international humanitarian law, particularly to the Third Geneva Convention, prisoners of war must be released immediately after the cessation of hostilities. Armenia and Azerbaijan were agreed to exchange prisoners of war and civilian captives on all-for-all basis. But Azerbaijan not only artificially delayed this process, but also captured another 64 Armenian soldiers after the ceasefire, attacking 2 villages in the Hadrut region of Artsakh, which were under the control of the Armenian side. Moreover, serious criminal cases were initiated against these Armenians in Azerbaijan to present them as terrorists and to punish them. I should mention that this issue is exclusively a matter of international humanitarian law, but Azerbaijan is politicizing this process, trying to pressure Armenia and gain benefits in violation of international law. Such actions by the official Baku are very much similar to the terrorist country behavior. Azerbaijan still does not even confirm how many Armenian prisoners it has. To understand how many lives in Baku is responsible for. Taking into account the high level of ethnic hatred and Armenophobia in Azerbaijan, we cannot be sure that Armenian prisoners of war and civilian captives will not be beaten, tortured, or ill-treated. Many videos and facts show behavior of Azeri against Armenians. Dear colleagues, the abuse of this humanitarian process must be condemned strongly by the international institutions and community. Azerbaijan, as a member state of OSCE, must be forced to release all Armenian prisoners of war and civilian captives. Otherwise, we consider that Azerbaijan is a terrorist country which holds our prisoners of war in order to extort benefits for their return. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. I give the floor to Mr. Frolov from Ukraine, to be followed by Mr. Cohen, who I believe is now connected. Mr. Frolov, you have the floor, please.
Mr. Chairperson, while our organization places respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms at the core of its comprehensive approach to security, we view the protection of human rights in the situation of occupation as a key challenge in the OSCE region. The Russia-occupied Crimea and parts of Donbass transformed into a territory of lawlessness, where human and civil rights and freedoms are violated. Illegal passportization or forced imposition of Russian citizenship are being carried out, where violence, torture, persecution, and suppression of any dissent became an everyday practice. Ukraine is concerned with the ongoing freedom of movement restriction of the OSCE SMM monitors by the Russian side. As you know, since the very beginning of the conflict in Donbass, more than 13,000 persons were killed and more than 25,000 were wounded, including 3,000 killed and 7,000 wounded civilians. In violation of norms and principles of international law, Moscow continued to integrate the occupied territories in the Donetsk and Lugansk regions into the socio-economic, legal, and humanitarian space of the Russian Federation. We are very concerned about the process of illegal passportization of the local population is going on. More than 156,000 passports were already being issued. Dear colleagues, unfortunately, the access of International Committee of the Red Cross, as well as UN High Commissioner of Human Rights representatives to the occupied parts of Donbass is regularly obstructed. Efforts of the delegation of Ukraine in the TCG to raise this problem, including the situation in the secret prison Izolyatsiya in the Donetsk, where detainees are regularly tortured and exposed to sexual violence, are rejected outright. Of particular concern is the comprehensive militarization of education and propaganda of war among minors. According to the Russian occupation authorities, the process embraces 200,000 children, which roughly corresponds to the number of all school children in Crimea. It is of the utmost importance to continue to seek practical ways to address multiple and grave human rights abuses by the occupation administrations in Crimea and in parts of Donbass, where millions of our citizens live, ensuring full access for international monitoring missions, in particular of UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine and OSCE SMM, remains of critical importance. We expect our Parliamentary Assembly and the Swedish chairpersonship to denounce swiftly, publicly, and without fear any violation of the human dimension commitments by the aggression state, as well as to compel it to fulfill its obligations under international humanitarian law. I thank you.
Thank you. I understand we have a technical problem with Mr. Cohen for the moment, so I pass the floor to Ms. Agazadeh from...
I'm here.
Excuse me, Mr. Cohen, please.
Yeah, thank you. I've been known to have technical problems, but not at this moment. It's good to be with you technically and virtually. And I thank you for your work as Mr. Chair when you were rapporteur and the rapporteur for his work. This is a situation where at each of the OSCE meetings that I've been to talking about human rights, it's kind of like preaching to the choir. We all kind of have the same issues and the same concerns. And so it's a special place to be. And our chair from Norway has a great record, and she's committed to human rights like none other. And Norway is as a country as well. So thank you, Ms. Hendrickson. And in spite of our Super Bowl commercial, we know the difference between Norway and Sweden. Great country, home of the International Seed Bank. Russia, Belarus, and Hungary. That's got to be our three focuses. Russia has shown its aggressive nature in Ukraine. They've shown their aggressive nature in other countries. They have not complied with rules of civilized countries and ROSC countries have concerning warfare and concerning borders. And their poisoning of Mr. Navalny and their arrest of him and sending him to 3 years or 2 years plus in some prison camp is abhorrent. And we need to stand up to that. I know we will, and I urge you to do it. America has had a difficult couple of 4 years. We've turned the corner. We elected a new president who believes in human rights, who believes in foreign policy that is consistent with our values that we profess and that we have had for all but the last 4 years. And we're back. Belarus, we visited. We had certain hopes that Mr. Lukashenko would change. He hasn't. The people who've been arrested there need to be released, and elections need to be monitored, and they need to have democracy and hope. And in Hungary, which I visited, I've seen some of the same individuals as I saw the waitress who I mentioned yesterday in Belarus yearn for freedom, yearn for academic freedom. They've taken over the television networks. They've taken over some of the schools. Hungary is going the wrong direction as well. So I just look forward to being with you in person, where we can shake hands, we won't wear masks, and we'll all be together, and we'll try to work for a better tomorrow. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. I then give the floor to Ms. Agazad from Azerbaijan, followed by Ms. Sviatenko from Russia, please. Ms. Agazad, you have the floor.
Thank you for giving me the floor. I'm from Azerbaijan. After the signing the trilateral statement, the Azerbaijani side has entered the phase of post-conflict rehabilitation, reconstruction, and reintegration. The government began to take practical steps to eliminate the consequences of the occupation of the liberated territory. The conflict is over. Now we have to focus on sustaining peace, rehabilitation, and reconstruction activities. About war prisoners, which my colleague from Armenia said, to date, Azerbaijan has returned the bodies of 71 prisoners of war and prisoners and more than 1,300 Armenian servicemen to Armenia. At the same time, Armenia and some corrupt circles under the influence are trying to portray the 62 Armenian citizens detained during anti-terrorist operation as prisoners of war and spread and through information in order to get them back in accordance with paragraph 8 of the November 20 trilateral statement. What really happened? I would like to inform my colleagues that the mentioned group of 62 members of the Armenian armed forces was detained as a result of recent anti-terrorist operation in the liberated territory of the Republic of Azerbaijan. Interrogation related that all members of the group are Armenian citizens, mainly from Iraq region. Following the signing of the trilateral statement, the group was illegally deployed in the liberated territories of Azerbaijan on November 26, 2020, with the aim of organizing terrorist activities against the Azerbaijan army and civilians. As a result of a series of terrorist attacks carried out by a provocative group in the liberated territories, 4 Azerbaijani servicemen were killed and 1 civilian was seriously injured. At present, all members of the provocative group are involved in the investigation procedures by the relevant government agencies of Azerbaijan for committing crimes in Azerbaijan. Therefore, these persons are not eligible for release. This is a clear violation of Armenian obligations to respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Azerbaijan and to refrain from the use of force within the norms and principles of international law. And also, Armenia is the last country that can talk about anti-terrorism activity. Okay, thank you for your attention.
Thank you. And I pass the floor to Ms. Sviatenko from Russia to be followed by Mr. Aydin from Turkey. Ms. Sviatenko, you have the floor. Your microphone, please. You're muted, I believe.
Есть. Добрый день, уважаемые участники сегодняшнего обсуждения. Прежде всего, я хочу поблагодарить госпожу Хендриксон за очень интересный доклад. И хочу отметить, что Российская Федерация полностью привержена соблюдению прав женщин и укреплению подлинного равенства между мужчинами и женщинами. Я полагаю, что совместными усилиями нам удалось наработать солидный комплекс обязательств ОБСЕ в этой сфере. Считаю, что приоритетом в данном вопросе должно быть предоставление именно равных возможностей для мужчин и женщин для реализации их прав, а не искусственное выравнивание, осуществляемое через введение специальных гендерных квот. В современных реалиях необходимо отходить уже от системы квотирования как пережитка прошлого, так как на данном этапе женщины способны без подобных инструментов, которые насаждаются сверху, продвинуться в различных сферах жизни общества. На системной основе я призываю государства-участников ОБСЕ и профильные структуры организации уделять большое внимание социальным и экономическим правам женщин, отказавшись от откровенных перекосов в пользу обсуждения гражданских и политических прав. Убеждены, что при выборе докладчиков на различных мероприятиях ОБСЕ важно бороться с любой дискриминацией по признаку пола. Однако главным критерием должны быть, конечно же, профессиональные качества потенциальных участников. Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you. Then I pass the floor to Mr. Aydin from Turkey, to be followed by Mr. Mamiko from Belarus. Please, Mr. Aydin, you have the floor. Mr. Aydin, please.
Yes, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, please continue.
Thank you very much. Today is the 26th of February, and it is the 29th anniversary of the Armenian aggression and invasion of Nagorno-Karabakh in 1992. And I've just come back from the organization of remembrance of those 700 people massacred during this aggression. Just, dear colleagues, distinguished members, before I would like to thank Mr. Chair Hajiani and Rapporteur Ms. Harrington, for their remarks. In recent years, we have witnessed a rising trend of xenophobia, Islamophobia, and anti-Semitism in the OSCE area. This is a serious threat against harmony and speech and peace of our societies. Last year, on 19 February, in Hanau, Germany, 9 migrant groups were killed in the racist attack. This event was another confirmation of the rising racism, Islamophobic sentiments sweeping Europe. We observe with great concern that populist politicians are discriminatory and xenophobic discourses. These extreme discourses of politicians also prepare a fertile ground on which hatred against the other can grow. Dear sir, and the distinguished speakers, we should all react much more resolutely against all discriminatory discourses. Regrettably, the freedom of expression is also being abused. On the other hand, intolerance and discrimination, we have negative consequences for many fundamental freedoms, including the freedom of religion and belief. Political and leaders, as well as the media, have a special responsibility to promote tolerance and social harmony. Madam Rapporteur, the report of the committee should focus on taking concrete and effective measures against these dangerous rising trends. We value OSCE's and ODIHR's and the Parliamentary Assembly's toolbox in this area. Our organization is at the forefront of the international efforts, but we must further strengthen our efforts. That's my last wishes. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Aydin. I then pass the floor to Mr. Mamiko from Belarus, to be followed by Ms. Karapetyan from Armenia. Mr. Mamiko, please.
Всем добрый день. Прежде всего, хотелось бы поблагодарить за возможность участия в высоком собрании Ассамблеи, впервые проводимой в удаленном доступе. К сожалению, в настоящее время позицию в отношении Беларуси и отдельных членов парламентской ассамблеи нельзя назвать в полной мере конструктивной. Резкие заявления отдельных парламентариев наносят ущерб нашим отношениям. Обращаем внимание уважаемых коллег, что распространение информации и формирование общественного мнения требует повышенного чувства ответственности. Важно избегать поверхностных суждений. В том числе представление ситуации в Беларуси как конфликта между позицией всего общества и действующей властью. На самом деле это позиция меньшей части гражданского общества. Поэтому сейчас в Беларуси идет процесс выработки концепции дальнейшего развития с учетом мнения не только оппозиционно настроенной части, а в целом всех граждан. Возможно, на взгляд одних, это происходит слишком медленно и без их непосредственного участия. На взгляд же других, излишняя поспешность вредна. Но процесс идет, и это очевидно. Хотел бы проинформировать уважаемых коллег о том, что власть в Беларуси остается устойчивой и стабильной. Буквально 2 недели назад в нашей стране прошел общенациональный форум, 6-е Всебелорусское народное собрание. Его проведению предшествовала широкая общественная дискуссия. Было создано более 1000 диалоговых площадок с участием представителей общественных организаций, политических партий, бизнес-сообществ, разных слоев молодежи. Поступило свыше 17 тысяч предложений, касающихся перспектив развития страны. Создается Конституционная комиссия по разработке в текущем году предложений по изменению Конституции, которые будут вынесены на референдум. Стоят задачи по перераспределению полномочий между государственными органами, усилению роли политических партий и поддержке инициатив гражданского общества. Мы слышим и учитываем мнение белорусов, которые выступают за перемены и трансформацию политической системы. Однако дискуссия возможна только в рамках здоровой политической конкуренции и в строгом соответствии с нашим национальным законодательством. Диалог не может строиться в угоду кому бы то ни было под давлением улицы или при внешнем посредничестве. Беларусь не скрывает, что ощущает угрозу серьезного вмешательства извне во внутренние дела суверенной страны. В этих условиях власть попросту вынуждена идти на жесткие и часто неоднозначно воспринимаемые шаги по поддержанию в стране социально-экономической и внутреннеполитической стабильности. Мы последовательно выступаем и продолжаем выступать за равноправные и добрососедские отношения с зарубежными странами и будем адекватно оценивать их позицию, исходя из намерений либо поддержать нас в трудную минуту, либо усугубить конфликт путем введения очередных санкций и подогревания извне протестного движения. Белорусская сторона подтверждает свою готовность к открытому и честному диалогу со своими коллегами. Мы рассчитываем, что члены Ассамблеи проявят мудрость и непредвзятость. Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you. I then pass the floor to Ms. Karapetyan from Armenia, to be followed by Mr. Halaychuk from Ukraine. Ms. Karapetyan, please.
Dear Kyriakos, dear Kari, dear Andreas, thank you very much for this session. Instead of my video, you are seeing a photograph of a post stamp. This post stamp was produced in Azerbaijan in 2020. It shows a disinfection specialist spraying the area of Nagorno-Karabakh where Armenians live. And I wonder what other interpretation could come to the viewer's mind, but the one that Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh are being depicted as the virus in need of eradication. This post stamp basically depicts the whole tragedy of the second Nagorno-Karabakh war amidst the COVID pandemic. I want to use the very short time in this session to advocate for a concrete action through which we, as parliamentarians, can contribute to human rights protection. On November 9, the second Nagorno-Karabakh war that Azerbaijan waged came to a stop, and the death toll on the Armenian side is now at 3,500 people. Many of the fallen were 18-year-old soldiers. You can guess there is a similar or even higher death toll in Azerbaijan because the side that's attacking in the disaster of war loses more lives. With the November 9 announcement, Armenia and Azerbaijan agreed to exchange all soldiers and civilians in their custody. Yet today, dozens of Armenians are still in captivity in Azerbaijan, including a group of 56 soldiers that were captured following the end of the war. Now, colleagues from Azerbaijan say they are terrorists. This is done for two purposes. First, to use the captives as a cruel leverage on Armenia, and second, to create a mirror accusation for the foreign terrorist fighters that Turkey transported from Syria to Azerbaijan to fight the war. This is very similar as the mirror accusation of genocide for genocide. Yet the foreign terrorist fighters that have been in custody in Armenia are not Azerbaijani nationals. They are Syrian, they speak Arabic, and Azerbaijan obviously does not want them back. In the meantime, we want our soldiers and civilians to come back home. They are not terrorists. And it is to you I turn to join your voices with us to demand from the authorities of Azerbaijan to return our soldiers and civilians home. Thank you.
Thank you. I then pass the floor to Mr. Halaychuk from Ukraine, to be followed by Mr. Demesmerker from Belgium. Please, Mr. Halaychuk.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Today, we commemorate the 7th anniversary of the start of occupation of Crimea by the Russian Federation. The current trends of the situation in Crimea, unfortunately, can be generally characterized as deteriorating in all areas. In the temporarily occupied Crimea since 2014, Ukrainians and Crimean Tatars face systematic violations of their political, cultural, and religious rights, which amount to racial discrimination. Since 2016, the Majlis of Crimean Tatar people remains banned, contrary to Russia's international obligations and the order of the International Court of Justice. Russia has been suppressing the religious freedoms in Crimea. After occupation, 1,300 religious organizations in Crimea were banned. The occupation administration conducts a systemic policy of forcing the Orthodox Church of Ukraine out of the peninsula. The preschool education in Ukrainian is not available at all. Formally, there is one school with Ukrainian language of instruction, but according to local population, it is mere formality, and education process is not in Ukrainian. Only a little over 3% of school children study in Crimean Tatar language, and there is no school with Crimean Tatar language of instruction. Remaining seized of this critical issue for the regional security, the UN General Assembly adopted in December 2020 another significantly strengthened resolution on the situation of human rights in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol. The document recognizes in particular that Russia, as occupying power, does not fulfill its international obligations in the field of human rights and international humanitarian law. In the context of strengthening the international policy of non-recognition of the attempted annexation of Crimea, the resolution clearly defines the illegitimacy of the bodies and officials of the Russian Federation in Crimea, clearly defining them as occupation authorities of the Russian Federation. We emphasize the importance of stepping up efforts of the OSCE as regional international organization, including its Parliamentary Assembly, in contributing to the full implementation of the respective UNGA resolution. We also underline the need for enhanced international cooperation aimed at the occupation of Crimea, and with this in mind, Ukraine initiated establishing of the Crimean platform. The platform's final goal is to achieve an eventual deoccupation of Crimea. The activities of the platform will focus on 5 priorities: non-recognition policy, security, including freedom of navigation, effectiveness of sanctions against the aggressive state and their extension, international humanitarian law and protection of human rights, overcoming the negative impact of the temporary occupation of Crimea on the economy and the environment. We plan to hold an inaugural summit of Crimean Platform in Kyiv on 23rd August of this year. I will share with the committee the presentation of this initiative. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I then give the floor to Mr. Demesmaeker from Belgium, to be followed by Agayeva from Azerbaijan.
Thank you. Hello, colleagues. Every conflict is ugly and every war is a humanitarian tragedy on all sides of the conflict. The Nagorno-Karabakh conflict is no different. There is a ceasefire, but many issues remain. In the immediate aftermath of the conflict, there is indeed the issue of the prisoners. And our view is that we should give our attention to this as a matter of priority, because it is a matter of human dignity. I am really alarmed by the reports about the estimates that there are more than 200 Armenian captives and prisoners of war in Azerbaijan, even being difficult to determine the exact number of the captives because of the lack of cooperation of the Azerbaijani side. Cooperation including with international organizations. I read the reports about several dozen Armenians, including civilians, who have been taken prisoner by the Azerbaijani armed forces after the ceasefire in November. Reports about torture, both physical and psychological, and humiliation of Armenian captives and prisoners of war, even published on the internet. Colleagues, we can speak about an ongoing violation of international humanitarian law in the treatment of Armenian hostages. And we insist that the international community addresses this and that the OSCE addresses this matter as a matter of urgency. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor then to Ms. Agayeva from Azerbaijan, to be followed by Mr. Lafreda from Canada. Please, Ms. Agayeva.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a minute. I'm so sorry that the image of my country has been wrongfully accused by our Armenian colleague here, as usual. But my colleague from Azerbaijan has already answered her question. But I just want to highlight once more that it's not a secret that Armenia has always supported terrorism. And I think there is no need to manipulate with this. And could she answer my question that what were doing Armenian armed groups in the territory of Azerbaijan after the war? Azerbaijan is a country which has always paid great attention to international humanitarian cooperation. International cooperation plays a special role in the development of relations among countries. Being an Azerbaijani representing my country here, I can't help mentioning about the major humanitarian disaster Azerbaijani people face nowadays. I'd like to talk about the Khojaly genocide, which is recognized by many countries and an inhumane act in the history of mankind. It was committed 29 years ago on 26th of February. In the early 90s, as a result of Armenia's military aggression against Azerbaijan, 20% of our territory became under occupation. You all know about this. Now you all are aware as well that almost after 30 years, Azerbaijan's army has liberated Azerbaijan's occupied territories by the Armenian armed forces. As a result of this occupation and the ethnic cleansing policy, more than 1 million Azerbaijanis became refugees and IDPs in their homeland. Innocent people were killed. A war crime was committed against our people in Khojaly town of Azerbaijan. Today, it's the 29th anniversary of the Khojaly genocide. As a result of genocide in the town of Khojaly, 613 civilians were killed, 106 of them were women and 63 children. Many countries have already recognized the Khojaly genocide as an act of genocide. The Armenians have destroyed our historical and religious monuments in the occupied lands. The OSCE has sent fact-finding missions to the occupied territories, and this is openly stated in their reports. My time is over. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for attention.
Thank you. I then pass the floor to Mr. Lafreda from Canada, to be followed by Ms. Vilja Aleknaite from Lithuania. Please, Mr. Lafreda.
Good morning. Dear colleagues, I appreciate your interventions this morning. I will be sharing some insights from my own experience as a senator in Canada's upper chamber of parliament. I hope that my comments will provide some food for thought. As parliamentarians, we know the critical role that parliaments play during a crisis. Parliaments must ensure that public health responses consider the needs of all segments of the population and ascertain that emergency government powers are limited in time and scope and subject to parliamentary oversight. During a crisis, parliaments should also examine and report on government expenses. As a member of the Senate Standing Committee on National Finance, which primarily examines the federal government's spending proposals and budget implementation bills, I understand the importance of this function. At the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, the government of Canada, just like governments in other countries, asked Parliament to pass legislation to authorize emergency spending without delay. The House of Commons and the Senate did so. Following this, the Senate asked the National Finance Committee to review the economic consequences of the government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The National Finance Committee released an interim report in July 2020. In our report, we stated that the government's response likely prevented financial devastation for millions of Canadians and avoided what could have been a much worse economic crash. The report also includes 16 recommendations, which provided direction and advice to the Government of Canada as it adjusted its response. The process of examining and reporting on national finances is key to government transparency and accountability. It is an opportunity for the government to receive valuable feedback from citizens and recommendations from parliamentarians. I encourage you all to support your finance committees as they continue the hard but essential work of studying the emergency spending during this crisis. Thank you for your attention. Merci.
Thank you. I then pass the floor to Ms. Aleknaite Abramikian, to be followed by Ms. Hedy Fry. Ms. Aleknaite Abramikian.
Thank you. Thank you. Dear colleagues, dear Ms. Harry Henriksen, thank you for your concise presentation. I want to say that yesterday I had possibility to participate in an event organized by Norwegian Helsinki Committee with the support of permanent representation of Lithuania to OSCE. And it only confirmed my view that terrible violations of human rights are taking place in some parts of the OSCE area, including in Belarus and Russia. The saddest thing about it is impunity. Regimes are not accountable for any actions they take against their own people. People of Belarus want a simple thing, right to fair elections, nothing more. And this is why they are being heavily beaten. Those in power brutally demonstrate their physical strength, but in fact, they are full of fear of these peaceful singing people. One of the speakers of yesterday's Norwegian Helsinki Committee's event, Mr. Bill Broder, has defined the fundamental reason of this fear. He named some regimes kleptocracies. In kleptocracies, rulers are always terrified of a perspective of being replaced in fair elections, because it seems they have illegally obtained their millions and billions together with their comrades. And they are not ready to return back to simple apartments after stepping down, like, for example, Her Excellency Chancellor Angela Merkel is going to. Why I'm talking about it? Because our respective states are doing business with those regimes. Doing business is something absolutely natural, but how often do we, defenders of democracy and human rights, raise questions about corruption? Isn't it so that while seeking profit, business people and governments sometimes close their eyes to many things, and therefore such projects as, for example, Nord Stream 2 are being taken forward? Dear colleagues, we should ask ourselves, do we have enough potential of disagreement with systemic violations of the fundamental principles we all are agreed? And at least I know one thing very well, that fight against corruption is also fight for human rights. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. I then pass the floor to Dr. Hedi Fry, to be followed by Ms. Sederfeld from Sweden. Dr. Fry, please.
Thank you very much, Andreas. Again, what an excellent report from the Committee 3 here. And I wanted to comment on a couple of things. We all know that COVID-19 exposed so many vulnerabilities, so many cracks, not only in our society, but in our institutions. And I think we know again that we see that there are many people like seniors, young people, various ethnic and racial groups that were impacted by COVID-19. We know there was a great deal of racism. In fact, in my city of Vancouver, racism against the Chinese in Vancouver increased 700% in the last year. So there are these vulnerabilities. I think your committee always exposed the vulnerabilities for us. Knowing the vulnerabilities in our society means we cannot just go back to business as usual. We have to now begin to change the way our institutions work and the way that we actually produce our social, economic, and human rights programs in our own countries. But what we've also seen is the institutions. For instance, some countries within this region have used the excuse of COVID-19 to repress their populations, to deny human rights to their populations. And I think this is something that we have to fight. We have to speak out against it. Because one of the things that we need to do, and again, we've heard Ms. Henriksson talk about that, is that we need to take this opportunity to become resilient societies, to rebuild, to become resilient institutions, to deal with the violence, for instance, that women and girls and journalists are currently facing in our society. Not just violence online, but violence physically, etc. We need to start doing things about it. And therefore, we must take this opportunity to come together, like-minded countries in the OSCE, to address all of these exposed cracks in our systems, in our society, and in our economic systems. And we must know that this is the first but not the last pandemic. There are going to be many more to come. How we weather this, how we build resilient societies is going to be up to us. We must show here that we have the ability and that we are able to work together for the benefit of all of us and for the benefit of this region. Thank you again.
Thank you. Then have two more speakers in this debate before we move to the next agenda item. First, I call Ms. Sederfeld from Sweden, to be also followed by Mr. Söder from Sweden. Ms. Sederfeld, please.
Thank you very much, Andreas. And thank you. I would also like to express my thank you to the third committee, the leadership, for your report, and Kari Henriksson for her work. I would like to start with to say that migration, they exemplify the importance of multilateralism and have a place to fulfill in the OSCE perspective. And that's based on the Helsinki Final Act as well as the Paris Charter. And it's in all dimensions, the human rights, security, economy. The COVID affect our society in all aspects. Those who suffer most during the pandemic are those who have the weakest position. And I think here about refugees that several of my colleagues have talked about earlier. And we from the ad hoc working group on migration, we have worked very hard with the issues related to refugees during this period. And what we have noticed is that those who suffer most among refugees is children, it's women, the most vulnerable. And what we also have noticed is that trafficking is increasing, just as well violence against women. Children do very often have difficulties to fulfill their education. And I would also like to say that trafficking, not only trafficking, migration, if it's not secure, it challenges our society. And what can we do as parliamentarians? We have to put focus on the humanitarian perspective. We have to put pressure on our government to implement all the agreements and treaties that they have done. We have to follow up that they do that work. And we need to have the humanitarian perspective. And also, what I would like to say, most of all, include refugees in the national vaccination program. It's one of the most important issues these days. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And then I pass the floor, the last speaker in this debate, Mr. Söder from Sweden, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. On the 27th of September, Azerbaijan attacked Nagorno-Karabakh and Armenia. There is no uncertainty that the attack was carefully planned. For quite some time, Azerbaijan has conducted a process of rearmament with large purchases of military equipment from predominantly Turkey. During the attack, Turkish forces and hired ISIS terrorists from Syria participated in the fight. The conflict escalated quickly and the rest of the world stood by and watched when war crime after war crime was committed. There are numerous witness accounts and evidence that show deliberated targeting from the Azerbaijanis on hospitals, schools, residential areas and other objects not of military nature, with civilian casualties as a result. Azerbaijani forces have conducted extrajudicial executions of captured Armenian forces and have encouraged foreign Islamic terrorists to decapitate Armenian soldiers. Moreover, there has been systematic destruction of Armenian relics as a method to erase the ancient Armenian culture in the area. The actions of Azerbaijan, backed by Turkey, constitute grave breaches of many fundamental principles in international law. These actions have to a large degree been met with silence. Sadly, in a similar way as when the Young Turks tried to obliterate Armenia and its people during the 1915 genocide, the world stood once again by and watched as a new attempt was made. The people responsible for these crimes must be charged with crimes against the international law. On the 10th of November, a ceasefire agreement was signed between the fighting parties. Behind this agreement was Russia, who had brokered a deal with Turkey. We can conclude that both Russia and Turkey has used Armenia and Azerbaijan as pawns in their grand ambitions and successfully outmaneuvered the OSCE Minsk Group as a forum for conflict resolution. I'm worried about the destructive policy of Azerbaijan to politicize humanitarian issues and their blockade of international relief efforts, including the UN, to reach Nagorno-Karabakh, which hinders the possibility to give people in the area humanitarian aid. I urge Azerbaijan to push for a quick exchange of dead bodies, prisoners of war, and hostages, and to immediately cease extrajudicial actions against them and make sure their safe return to Armenia. If there will be any chance whatsoever to rebuild some form of trust between the two states, there must be a swift and unconditional release and return of prisoners. Moreover, we must work to reactivate the OSCE Minsk Group as a relevant party in the conflict resolution process in order to create a long-term sustainable solution to the crisis. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That concludes the debate on this item. I understand that Ms. Henriksson will respond at the very end of the committee to any further discussion, in which case I hand the floor back to Mr. Hajiani. If you can, please, Chairman, it's your floor.
Thank you, Andreas. Thank you also to all of you. You have taken the floor. Special thanks to Kari for her report. I think her suggestions are quite complete. I would please Ms. Kari to take into account the input expressed by colleagues. And in case that we can continue to the next agenda item, number 4, presentation by Ambassador Ms. Anne-Christie Carlsen, Chairperson of the Human Dimension Committee of the OSCE, Permanent Council and Permanent Representative of Norway to the OSCE. I am pleased to now welcome Ambassador Carlsen to our committee. I look forward to hearing what plans you have for the Permanent Council's Human Dimension Committee. The committee you chair is effectively our committee's counterpart of the governmental side of the OSCE, so it is very important for us to hear your opinions. We will appreciate if you could please keep your remarks to some 7 minutes. You have the floor, Ambassador. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hajiani. It is indeed a pleasure for me to participate here and have the opportunity to present our plans to the Parliamentary Assembly and to the General Committee on Democracy, Human Rights and Humanitarian Questions. I would have, of course, loved to meet you all in person, but I am happy that it is possible to speak to you all in this format. The human dimension is an integral part of the OSCE comprehensive security concept. Fundamental rights are under pressure. Functioning democratic institutions are vital for the well-being of all citizens of the OSCE area. Gender equality needs to be integrated in all our work. Aspects of social and economic rights need to be addressed in light of the pandemic. The safety and well-being of our citizens are important to uphold peace and stability throughout our region. Sweden has taken a holistic approach across dimensions in their chairmanship of the OSCE. In chairing the Human Dimension Committee, we have let this inspire us. We have to some extent planned our work program in accordance with the Swedish monthly cross-dimensional topics. However, there are many different views on what issues should and should not be discussed in the Human Dimension Committee. Before taking over as chair, I had consultations with many delegations to get a better picture of the priorities. In January, the committee had an initial meeting where we discussed human rights and the OSCE comprehensive security concept. It was a fruitful discussion on why there needs to be a human dimension to security and how human rights and democracy relate to security policy in a broader sense. Together with the bilateral consultations we have had, this has served as a base for creating a work program for the committee in 2021. We will have a thematic approach each month and no country-specific issues. Our first regular meeting, the February meeting last week, was on the topic of media freedom, access to information, and disinformation. We were honored to have the new representative on freedom of the media, Teresa Ribeiro, to speak to us at that meeting alongside other panelists. We are now preparing for the March meeting on women's political participation. Later this spring, we are planning meetings on the socio-economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. We also plan a meeting later on combating intolerance and non-discrimination, on the right of peaceful assembly, and the follow-up meeting of the Ministerial Council decision in December on prevention and eradication of torture. After the summer, we plan meetings on trust in political parties, on national minorities and indigenous peoples, and on public confidence in electoral processes. We plan no committee meeting in December, as we will need to focus on the human dimension implementation meeting at that time. We hope this program will allow for valuable discussions. Our focus is first and foremost to look at the commitments participating states already have and create space for exchange of experience on how to fulfill existing commitments. The meetings of the committee are an addition to the overall human dimension work program of the Swedish chairpersonship. Issues not included in the work program of this committee may very well be included in one of the other human dimension events or in special or ad hoc meetings of the Human Dimension Committee. As committee chair, we hope to provide for good and substantial discussion and an atmosphere conducive to finding common ground in this important but sensitive dimension of our work. We believe that good and respectful discussion on relevant topics create the basis for further developing this field of work. For the organization to remain relevant, we need to engage with society outside our own closed circles. We plan on continuing the tradition of inviting different stakeholders in the work of the HDC, including contributions of speakers from academic institutions, civil society, the OSCE institutions and field operations, as well as representatives of other international organizations. We are already in contact regarding possible participation also from the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly and look forward to cooperating with you in the months to come. I am probably not the only one who is getting tired of numerous video conferences. Therefore, we are experimenting with the Zoom format to make meetings more interactive and dynamic. We will continue this endeavor in dialogue with the participants. So far, I have experienced that the participating states have contributed eagerly and constructively in the meetings and between meetings. We find it of utmost importance this year that the Human Dimension implementation meeting will take place. And of course, we hope that the special circumstances which were the reason for not having HDIM last year are changed when we come to the fall. We are at least better prepared to find practical solutions compatible with whatever corona restrictions we will have at that time. So we will, as HDC chair, do our best to support the Swedish chairpersonship in finding a solution to all the issues necessary in order to move on with the preparations of HDIP. The attention and interest of OSCE parliamentarians are vital to the work in the human dimension of the OSCE. We need you to bring topics and discussions back to your respective parliaments and raise important issues there and with your governments and your constituencies. The role that the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly has and has had when it comes to election observation is of particular importance. I praise both you and ODIHR for implementation of election observation missions during the pandemic. It has been very demanding, but also invaluable for our work in this field. So thank you very much for these efforts. I look forward to hearing your views on the topics at hand and to cooperate with you throughout this year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. We look forward to continue close cooperation as it was also in the past. Mr. Baker Andreas wants to give the floor exceptionally for interpretation reasons to Ms. Maborne. Please, Andreas.
Sorry, I understand Ms. Maborne. You wanted to respond to the previous debate?
Merci, Andreas. Je voulais revenir... Alors, attendez, je m'entends en écho. Je voulais revenir sur les propos à propos de la Turquie et des rapports avec la France qui me paraissent nécessaires d'apaiser. En effet, l'escalade en matière verbale n'apporte jamais rien à personne et l'on peut constater que malgré la crise Covid, on a pu assister à des ingérences, notamment paramilitaires dans des zones de conflit, y compris de la guerre informationnelle, des fake news, de la part d'un certain nombre d'États-puissances. La France continue de croire dans le multilatéralisme et l'OSCE en est le lieu de l'expression. Par ailleurs, la loi française entend condamner les intégrismes, le terrorisme, sans amalgame avec les musulmans, mais protéger tous les croyants de notre pays, en les protégeant notamment des financements étrangers opaques de certains lieux de culte. Je vous remercie.
Andreas, please.
Sorry, back to you, Mr. Chairman, to introduce the next speaker, I believe Mr. Makachi, or the next debate.
So, the impact of COVID on democracy and elections. Colleagues, we now turn to the discussion on the state of a democracy after a year of COVID. We have short time, so I will pass the floor to our guest speakers in just a moment, but I want to underline why I think this is an important topic. Exactly 2 years ago, we had a special debate that focused on acceptable limits to human rights during times of emergency. During this past year, this theoretical debate was put to a real test, and I fear that many of our countries were lacking. This was an uncomfortable reminder that the topics we discuss have very real and practical consequences. Some of you may have seen the Economist Intelligence Unit's recent publication of the annual democracy index. They found that the pandemic resulted in the withdrawal of civil liberties on a massive scale and fueled an existing trend of intolerance and censorship of dissenting opinion. As elected officials, I think that ensuring an effective voice for our populations must be one of our most important duties. I hope our debate today can help us learn lessons and adapt to better serve our populations. We will take any questions or comments to agenda item 5, 6, and 7, all as one debate after agenda item number 7. So, presentation now by Mr. Matteo Mekazzi, Director of the OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights. To inform our discussion, I am now pleased to introduce Matteo Mekazzi, an old friend of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly and former chair of this committee. A former member of Parliament in Italy, a long-time activist in a number of human rights areas. I'm very pleased to welcome you back to the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, now as the newly appointed director of the OSCE ODIHR. We have long enjoyed close cooperation with your office, and I am sure that this will not only continue to improve under your leadership. Mr. Mekazzi, you have the floor, and I ask you to please keep your comments to 7 minutes. Please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's a great pleasure to be back to the CPA. As you have mentioned, I've been among your ranks for a number of years. I left 7 years ago when I was chairman of this committee, and also want to welcome the rapporteur, Ms. Hendrickson, because I served also as rapporteur in this committee. So it's really great to be back with you. But I want to mention another fellow member of this committee who actually preceded me as director of ODIHR. Is the vice chair, Mr. Michael Link, an old friend of mine. And it looks like that the OSCE Human Resources is providing a lot of support to the OSCE family, especially from this committee. So I think this is an important aspect of the work that we all have been doing with the OSCE. And by the way, both myself and Michael are members of this bold but mighty liberal group. So we are also proud of that. So, but going back to my presentation, I think, my coming back to the OSCE in the role of the director would provide me with a different perspective, having served with you, and I really look forward to working with you for the next 3 years. During the pandemic, our office has continued to focus in monitoring democratic institutions and human rights across the region. And I must say that I'm very proud to say that last year, ODIHR was the first international institutions to resume election observation during the pandemic. It wasn't easy, but this shows the commitment that we have to these values. And in the second part of the year, I'm also very proud to say that the OSCE rejoined forces with us to ensure that this important component of the democratic process, the election monitoring, would not become a casualty of the pandemic. So I want to thank each of you for agreeing and continuing to travel to foreign countries during the pandemic, which is also comes with personal risk. But I know that you have a strong commitment to the values that we pursue within the OSCE, and specifically for your organization, the OSCE. Coming to the measures which were implemented by participating states during the COVID-19 pandemic. Naturally, we all know that some restrictions were necessary to try to fight the pandemic. But at the same time, we should not forget that these measures had a strong impact on human rights, fundamental freedoms, and the functioning of democratic institutions. OSCE countries limited across the board freedom of movement, freedom of assembly, the functioning of parliament, courts, national human rights institutions, civil society activity, which are the normal watchdogs for democratic institutions. In brief, COVID-19 was not only a stress test for societies and for individuals. All of us have been affected one way or the other, but it was also a stress test for democratic institutions. So our office has decided last year to analyze the emergency measures that were adopted across the OSCE area. And there are some common findings. Usually, emergency measures lacked, in many cases, legal certainty. They had indefinite duration without a sunset clause that would put end to the emergency measures adopted by the government. In some cases, they lacked proportionality and were also applied with gender and diversity blindness, not taking care and paying attention to the vulnerable groups. Emergency measures also had a significant impact on oversight. And as you very well know, as parliamentarians, parliamentary oversight is an essential function of democracy. So when emergency measures are applied, we see with concern when there is a reduced ability for the parliaments to continue to exercise oversight on the work of the government. Overall, the 56 parliaments of the OSCE region reacted to the pandemic in different ways. And in many countries, they tried to really do the best to operate in a normal situation. There are some good lessons that we have learned, like the use of technology to allow for meetings to be held also when meeting in person is not possible, or for example, the application of remote voting for some members of parliament. But in some cases, we have seen also a reduction of the meetings of the committees or of the plenaries of parliaments, and in general, a weakening of the legislative process. In a few cases, we have also seen parliaments which have been unable to continue to perform in a normal situation, de facto abdicating their legislative function. So there are some conclusions that we can take from this experience, and maybe we can continue to share and learn from this. While there are many situations in which states manage well the pandemic and the restrictions, in other cases, some states have used the pandemic to roll back democratic standards and the rule of law. This crisis has emphasized both the fragility of multilateral institutions, and as you know, even the OSCE has been affected, but also the specific need that we have to have effective and functioning multilateral institutions. We need these institutions to be able to face and respond in an effective way to collective health and human security crises. The crisis has also emphasized the need for engaging citizens and community organizations and to establish trust between citizens and institutions, especially being able to provide accurate information to citizens and inform them of what the reality is. The crisis also highlighted the need for social justice and inclusion to protect especially the vulnerable communities, which has been mentioned even earlier by my dear friend Heidi Fry, have been the most impacted by this crisis. ODIHR continues to stand ready to assist all participating states with our toolbox, which has also been mentioned in the debate. I would really encourage you to engage your government in taking advantage of this possibility, whether it is for legislative assistance, capacity building, for institutions of civil society, monitoring of assemblies, or protecting human rights defenders. So to conclude, I really look forward to continuing our cooperation with the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, especially also in the field of election monitoring, which I know is very close to your heart and to the work that you do with the Assembly. And as you know, we have a couple of election observations are coming in the next months, starting with Bulgaria and Albania. So looking forward to the discussion and to the inputs that we will receive from you.
Thank you, Mr. Magachi. We look forward to continue close cooperation with you and your office. And now we move to the next agenda item, presentation by Ms. Teresa Ribeiro, OSCE representative on freedom of the media. I am now pleased to give the floor to Teresa Ribeiro, OSCE representative on freedom of the media. Ms. Ribeiro has taken up her responsibilities recently. We look forward to your office continuing to be a strong and consistent voice in favor of media freedom. As the OSCE's principal spokesperson on freedom of expression issues, I am sure You may have particular insights into the challenges of democratic governance these days. I look forward to hearing about your work and views, Ms. Ribeiro. You have the floor for up to 7 minutes. Please.
Thank you, Chairperson, Mr. Adjiani, first of all, for this invitation. Distinguished members of Parliamentary Assembly, Excellencies, it is a real pleasure to be here for a timely discussion on such an important thematic as the impact of COVID-19 on democracy and elections. Before zooming in on the most current challenge, COVID-19 pandemic, let me underline that I attach great importance to the parliamentary dimension of the work in this organization. A large part of my work is related to ensuring that the legal environments within which media operate in the OSCE participating states is in line with international standards on freedom of expression and with the relevant OSCE commitments. Having been a member of government, I am conscious of the enormous pressure on states to address some of the challenges of our times. Threats such as terrorism or violent extremism, a global health pandemic or social unrest require clear and timely reactions by the state. In doing so, the participating states should take human rights and fundamental freedoms as part of the solution and not as an impediment to properly respond to the challenges. Assisting the participating states, namely through legal reviews or other studies, is one of my obligations. Myself and my office stand ready to also cooperate closely with the national parliaments in order to make sure that the laws and legal amendments passed by national legislative assemblies are fully in line with freedom of expression. Now back to the COVID pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. This global crisis started to be a health crisis, but it has trickled down to many other areas. But I will keep my focus on those that are relevant to the OSCE comprehensive security model, including human rights and particularly freedom of the media. There should be no doubt that fighting this pandemic with strong measures is important. But even in such challenging circumstances, any reactions must be framed within human rights obligations. Any measure must be necessary, legitimate, non-discriminatory, temporary, and proportionate to achieve the objectives and subject to regular and effective oversight. We need to recall that COVID-19 is the first global pandemic in history in which technology and social media are being used on a massive scale to keep people informed about the rules we need to follow, the evolution of the disease, measures to counteract the social and economic impact, etc. And this is highly important to better face the situation, allowing us to keep safe, informed, and connected. But on the other hand, we are seeing an overabundance of disinformation and misinformation online. In many cases, state actors are themselves encouraging or further disseminating statements which they know to be disinformation for their own political purposes. In many other cases, governments are adopting general and vague prohibitions on the dissemination of information that are based on ambiguous ideas, including false news, incompatible with OSCE commitments and international standards for restrictions on media freedom. Many authorities have also used this crisis to fulfill their desire to strongly cut back on critical voices through new decrees or over-restrictive and disproportionate emergency measures. Distrust against media and against journalists has grown substantially in the past year, fueling disinformation. None of these issues is new. They did not arrive with the pandemic, and it will not end with the pandemic. However, the current crisis continues to demonstrate how important it is for the states to have well-established independent institutions and for citizens to have access to fact-based, reliable, and transparent information. In such a context, what should be the role of the governments and the parliaments? Across the OSCE region, the COVID-19 acted as a magnifying glass of previously existing and developing trends and tendencies in the field of media freedom and freedom of expression. Freedom of expression as a human right involves a positive obligation of governments and parliaments to guarantee freedom of the media, which includes promoting access to information and protecting diverse media, including those that scrutinize government actions and hold power to account. Therefore, OSCE participating states should promote media plurality and free and factual and investigative journalism as the best tool to mitigate misinformation, increase professional standards by ensuring an enabling environment for independent journalists, not through control or restriction, media literacy across the OSCE region to help citizens make better informed choices, clear regulation related to digital platforms, as well as independent oversight of its application to safeguard fair access, to ensure data protection, and to counteract incitement to hatred. Ensure that in the case of economic relief programs launched by the government parliaments to respond to financial challenges faced by media, they do not discriminate against certain media, but on the contrary, preserve plurality and a diverse media landscape. To conclude, allow me to recall that parliamentary oversight and control is also crucial to ensure that emergency measures are constantly reviewed, adjust, or lift once their legitimate aim ceases to exist or the measure is no longer proportionate to the purpose it should serve. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Ribeiro. Andreas wants to make a short comment. Mr. Baker, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a technical announcement. We will have to wrap up the interpretation in half an hour. That's at 6 o'clock CET. So we would ask if anybody in the list of speakers that will not be speaking in English, we will try and prioritize that so that you can be understood by as many as possible. Please let us know in the chat if that's the case. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Andreas. Let's move to the next agenda item, number 7, OSCE Parliamentary Assembly and Election Observation Reports. Colleagues, before moving to our debate, we will first hear from the leaders of our recent election observation missions. All of these elections have taken place under the cloud of COVID, and I think these reports will help provide some additional substance related to our debate today. I am therefore pleased to first ask for a report on the 30th of August parliamentary election in Montenegro. Our Vice President Margareta Sedefeld served as OSCE Special Coordinator for this observation mission. Margareta, you have the floor for maximum 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Dear colleagues, good afternoon. I am very delighted that we are discussing our election observations reports here in the third committee. The mission in Montenegro that I was pleased to lead was the first one that the OSCE PA deployed during the COVID pandemic. It was therefore an important test for us, but of course, more importantly, it was a test for the people and authorities of Montenegro. Working together with our partners from ODIHR, we concluded that the elections were competitive and took place in an environment highly polarized over issues of church and national identity. Contestants were able to convey their message, but the ruling party gained an undue advantage through misuse of office and state resources and dominant media coverage. The lack of independent campaign coverage by media further undermined the quality of information available to voters. The law provided basic regulation for the conduct of democratic elections, but gaps remained, particularly in campaign finance. We conducted that the elections were run overall transparently and efficiently. Although the State Election Commission did not properly fulfill its regulatory role. COVID-related restrictions limited physical campaign opportunities, but more importantly, it did not prevent voters from turning out in a high number. The turnout was 76.7%. Particularly related to our discussion today, it is noteworthy that campaign rallies were banned for a month due to the COVID-19 pandemic, while we concluded that contestants could convey their message during the campaign. We must remember that any restrictions on fundamental freedoms must be done in full compliance with the Constitution, and that Parliament must maintain effective oversight. We noted that it was problematic that footage covering the campaign in the media was overwhelmingly produced by contestants themselves, rather than by professional journalists. This might be partly due to the COVID restrictions, making it difficult for journalists to do their jobs, but it is a practice that we must actively discourage, as it clearly detracts from the media's role as an independent source of information. Overall, in Montenegro, it was a hard-fought campaign, but the ruling party benefits from an uneven playing field. The COVID impact on both the campaign and the election day was undeniably strong. And I hope these points can contribute to our coming debate. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Margareta. I will now pass the floor to Elona Hoxha, who was OSCE Special Coordinator for the Short-Term Observer Mission for the 31 October parliamentary elections in Georgia. Elona, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair, and dear colleagues. Thank you for this opportunity to discuss the Georgian elections within the context of COVID's impact on democracy. As you can imagine, COVID-19 also made it very challenging for our OSCE observers and for domestic stakeholders to organize the election in Georgia in October. It is reassuring that despite the safety threat posed by the pandemic, the people of Georgia were sufficiently engaged in the democratic process to vote in the large number. Our team worked closely with our colleagues from the ODIHR and the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe at NATO and enjoyed the excellent cooperation. I also want to extend my thanks to the authorities in Georgia for the strong support and facilitation provided to our observers. Together, we concluded that the elections were competitive and overall fundamental freedoms were respected. Pervasive allegations of pressure on voters and blurring of the line between the ruling party and the state reduced public confidence in some aspects of the process. While the elections were conducted under a revised legal framework following broad public consultations, overall it provided a sound basis for holding democratic elections. However, further efforts to address shortcomings are still needed, as concerns were raised by a lack of framework's effective implementation and enforcement in the areas of election country administrations, campaigning, and campaigning finance. The technical aspects of the elections were managed efficiently despite challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic, but the dominance of the ruling party in the election commissions negatively affected the perception of their impartiality and independence, especially at the lower levels. We also noted that the implementation of long-standing recommendations to regulate boundary delimitation is needed to ensure the quality of the vote and better guarantee political representation for national minorities.
The 30 single members' constituencies were defined through an exclusive political process, albeit one of the consensus, and resulted in significantly unequal distribution of registered voters, undermining the equality of the vote. Let me say a few words about the gender representation in the public office. Although Georgia's first female president was elected in 2018, rather regrettably, women remained underrepresented in the parliament. Consequently, the introduction of the mandatory gender quota for candidate lists was a very positive and welcome step, which has also addressed a previous recommendation by the ODIHR. We stand ready to continue to work closely with the Georgian parliament, with all political forces, both government and opposition, to strengthen Georgia's relations in the context of the OSCE, and I hope that all forces will seriously engage with the recommendations that have put forward. I hope that all political forces will assume their responsibilities, including working through the parliament to further improve the process on the basis of the very solid statement that we delivered. Such work can help secure democratic elections for the Georgian people well beyond the current challenges presented by the COVID. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elona. I am now very pleased to pass the floor to the Vice Chair of our committee, Michael Link. Michael was given the task of providing leadership as Special Coordinator for the OSCE's Observers Mission in the United States for the 3rd of November elections. Michael, you have the floor, please.
Dear Kyriakos, dear Kari, dear Andreas, dear colleagues, welcome from my self-quarantine here back home in South Germany. I'm very pleased, of course, that I had the honor to serve as a special coordinator for these US general elections, together, by the way, of course, not only by the way, but with a lot of our colleagues who managed to travel despite COVID, and headed by Kari Henriksen, our rapporteur. Kari, thanks, also special thanks to you, and of course to the outstanding team of our PA staff and of ODIHR. Ambassador Ursula Gacek headed, as I said, an outstanding team of ODIHR's experts deployed in the US in really difficult circumstances, given COVID, but also given certainly a situation where we had tense political situations, which we had to observe. All in all, we had some 50 people from ODIHR and some 52 parliamentarians and staff from PA. All in all, total and substantially less than planned, but that was because of COVID. Otherwise, we would certainly have been much more. We had received a timely invitation to observe already 9 months ahead of the elections. I want to underline that because for an orderly observation to happen, that is really important. Not all countries, not all participating states are as accommodating. The US State Department also made the important designation that our mission was in the national interest. That enabled our observers to travel despite COVID restrictions, and I underline this because we will face the pandemic for some more months. Nobody knows when it ends, and it's so important that observation, electoral observation continues. Therefore, thanks especially to our Secretary General Roberto Montella and to Andreas Baker, who insisted really that we continue this. And we as third committee always, Kyriakos also insisted that we continue to do this. Coming to the US proper, we have to say, and this is really characterizing the whole observation, that it should be noted that the administration of elections in the United States of America is fully decentralized. So almost all legislation and decision-making takes place at the state and even more so in many states at the county level. As a result, while we could still have a presence in advance of election day, long-term observers, for example, should be noted, and some PA members also coming early, with some PA members even traveling through the different states before, clearly ahead of election day, we could not participate in election day observation in every state. In several places, and that needs to be noted, due to state law, we could not observe on electoral day. We expect that this will be addressed in the future, and that is among the many recommendations, which can be found also in the ODIHR final report, by the way, published recently, I think 2 weeks ago. Thanks at this occasion also to Matteo Mecacci, the new ODIHR director, for this very, very, very important piece of work. The conclusions which we had to present on November 4th after Electoral Day, there we expressed our strong conviction that nobody, no politician, no elected official, nobody should limit the people's right to vote. Making sure that every vote is counted is a fundamental obligation for all branches of government. Baseless allegations of systemic deficiencies, notably by the incumbent president, including on election night and as well in the weeks after the election, did seriously harm public trust in democratic institutions. This observation mission certainly presented some unique challenges. Firstly, because of COVID, yes, that is clear. But secondly, with some 100 million people having already cast their ballots before November 3rd, much of the election took place before election day. And thirdly, given that the electoral system and legislation is so decentralized, the need for meticulous preparation of such a complex observation mission is a challenge in itself. But all in all, and let me highlight this, and this is very, very important, there has been substantial choice. There has been a real choice between very different presidential candidates, between different candidates running for the Congress. And that is important in itself, since democracy is not only about elections, but also about the chance of peaceful transfer of power because of elections. And therefore, let me finish by underlining that we all have been shocked to see as colleagues, how our colleagues in the US Capitol, of course, have been attacked on January 6th, and that 5 casualties had to be witnessed. This is certainly something which is an enormous challenge, and we feel with you, with our colleagues from the United States of America and of our good friends in the US Helsinki Commission, and are ready to support in any way with, of course, our possibilities to really work together, that things like this must never happen again. Therefore, let me underline, the follow-up process is so important, the follow-up on the recommendations, and therefore it's good that we discuss it today in this third committee, and we stand ready for questions. Thank you very much, and thanks to all of our fellow members who observed in this challenging observation. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I know that many of us follow this election particularly closely, and I want to thank you and Kari and Andres Baker for the major effort you made under stressful circumstances. I now pass the floor to Vice President Kristia Vigeni for a report on our observer team in Kazakhstan for the 10 January parliamentary elections. Christian, you have the floor, please. Please, Christian.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you. It's nice to see you all, even if in this online conference. Today we're discussing the impact of COVID on democracy. The fact that we have to meet virtually gives a strong indication of the challenges of the pandemic to all processes, including elections. We were glad that the parliamentary elections in Kazakhstan could nevertheless take place according to the electoral calendar. I want to warmly thank the authorities of the Republic of Kazakhstan for inviting us to observe the elections and for the good cooperation in facilitating the organization of the mission. Exchanging observations on our electoral practices is an important added value of the OSCE. The pandemic made the deployment of a full-fledged election observation mission very difficult. However, the OSCE was eager to provide its contribution, even with a smaller team. While we couldn't cover many polling stations and observe election day procedures throughout the country, our observation and analysis focused on the whole electoral process. Our overall preliminary conclusions was that the elections lacked genuine competition and highlighted the need of the political reforms announced by the President Tokayev. They were technically prepared efficiently amid the challenges posed by the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, while 5 parties participated in the electoral process and their candidates were able to campaign freely. limits imposed on the exercise of constitutionally guaranteed fundamental freedoms restrict the political space. Despite some positive reforms since previous elections, the factual limitations on freedoms of assembly, association, and speech run against OSCE commitments. Frequent revisions were made to the legal framework since the last parliamentary elections, before those of 10th of January, some of which partially addressed a few previous ODIHR recommendations. Still, we found that the legal framework is not yet conducive to holding elections in line with the OSCE commitments. Notwithstanding some increased scope for pluralism in opinions online, a subdued campaign further narrowed voters' ability to make an informed choice. Concerted measures in the run-up to elections, including the arrests and detention of peaceful protesters and civil society representatives, prevented some domestic observers from providing effective oversight. I wish to welcome the efficient administration of the elections, including the thorough COVID precautionary measures put into place in polling stations. The dedication of the thousands of members of precinct electoral commissions made these elections possible despite difficult conditions. While voting itself was generally organized efficiently, many procedural aspects on election day lacked full transparency. What is important now is to find the political will to further improve the electoral framework. ODIHR will soon be coming with a final report that includes recommendations, and I call upon the Kazakh authorities to follow up on these recommendations. We in the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly should be willing to support this process. OSCE principles call for open pluralism, freedom of association, and a flourishing, free, and vibrant civil society. My hope is that the listening state concept promoted by the President of Kazakhstan will truly enable this to happen, and that all citizens and groups' voices will be valued. Constructive criticism, even when harsh, are the salt of democracy. In this regard, while the new reforms announced by the government in the immediate aftermath of the elections would be an encouraging step, I remain concerned regarding continued allegations of limitations to civil society organizations. This year, Kazakhstan will celebrate 30 years of its independence. This should be another impulse for political reforms. I hope that the final report with recommendations of OSCE ODIHR will be taken seriously and decisive steps will be made in implementing those recommendations. Once again, I would like to thank the authorities, but also our colleagues that were able to arrive and help us provide this assessment. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. And finally, I pass the floor to our treasurer, Peter Joel Jensen, for his report and comments on the 10th January elections in Kyrgyzstan. Please.
Thank you. It is so nice to see and hear you all, but I have to say, having a winter meeting this way, it is just not the same. I miss the handshakes, I miss the hugs. All the best to you and your families. But I'm pleased to take part in this discussion with a short overview of our experience in Kyrgyzstan. As previous speakers have noted, COVID certainly has had a major impact on our work and our elections. However, many of the issues we raised go beyond the pandemic and touch on fundamental issues of democracies. Our observations were a team effort, including 84 observers deployed on election day. I intend thanks to the ODIHR experts, as well as my parliamentarian colleagues in the OSCE PA for their hard work. And it was actually quite an experience, both with our own people, with Gustavo and Andreas in front, but also with the people from the ODIHR who did fantastic work. It was very exciting to be a part of, and it was very exciting also to know what is going behind the closed doors and behind the curtains when you have to find common ground. The early presidential elections was held against a backdrop of political crisis that unfolded following the annulment of the October parliamentary elections. It was also held simultaneously with a referendum related to the constitution. Overall, we found that the legal framework allowed for a competitive election, and fundamental freedom were generally respected. The campaign, however, was dominated by one candidate who benefited from disproportionate finance means and misuse of administrative resources. This resulted in an uneven playing field. Both electoral processes and debate were weakened by the linkage of the referendum to the presidential elections, and specifically to one of the candidates. An overall lack of critical media reporting, partly due to a restrictive legal media framework, limited the ability of voters to make an informed choice. Election day was orderly and overall well run, although COVID-related health regulations were not well implemented. Our observers noted a number of challenges, including technical problems with the ballot scanning machines. However, the dedicated efforts of the people working in the election process enabled us to conclude that the election was generally well organized by the administration. I mentioned that one candidate could mostly campaign freely. However, many lacked the financial and organizational resources necessary. It was clear that this campaign was overwhelmingly dominated by Sadir Japarov, who is now president. For example, his campaign accounted for some 54% of the entire spending and 99% of the paid news coverage. In addition, our team received credible reports about organized attendance of state employees at rallies at Mr. Japarov, as well as about unequal assistance of local authorities for campaigns. All of this contributed to an uneven playing field, as I noticed in the beginning. The election held to a put at close to several dramatic and at times chaotic months for the people of Kyrgyzstan in what was generally well-run process. However, if the country is going to live up to the expectations of its people for a functioning democracy, fully and fair competition on a level playing field is critical. It was not the case at the 10th of January. And as a country moves towards constitutional reforms and expected parliamentary elections, I hope that careful attention will be paid to the concerns we have raised. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. And now we move to open debate on the proposed topic. I will ask Andreas to moderate this part of our discussion. Based on the expected interest, I have set a speaking time of 2 minutes. Andreas, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chairman. And as mentioned, we have worked to arrange the speakers list so that those needing interpretation into English will be prioritized at the top. So I first call Mr. Kozamzorov from Kazakhstan, to be followed by Ms. Friedel from Switzerland. Please, Mr. Kozamzorov.
Добрый день. Спасибо, господин председатель, уважаемые дамы и господа. Мы благодарны Бюро по правам человека, демократии и Парламентской ассамблее ОБСЕ за развертывание ограниченной миссии по мониторингу парламентских выборов в Казахстане в январе этого года. В целом выборы прошли организованно и эффективно, несмотря на пандемию коронавируса. Электоральная кампания прошла в условиях открытости и транспарентности. В мониторинге за выборами приняли участие 398 международных наблюдателей, из них 323 наблюдателя от 10 международных организаций и 76 наблюдателей из 31 страны. Отличительной особенностью прошедших выборов стало то, что они прошли по партийным спискам и в новых законодательных условиях. В 2020 году в рамках пакета президентских политических реформ либерализировано партийное законодательство, упрощен порядок регистрации и создания политической партии. В 2 раза снижен порог членства для регистрации новых партий. Законодательно закреплен институт парламентской оппозиции. Впервые в нашей парламентской практике введена 30% квота в партийных списках для женщин и молодежи до 29 лет с целью более активного их вовлечения в деятельность парламента и местных представительных органов власти. По итогам выборов в парламент прошли 3 политические партии. Это партия Нур-Отан, Демократическая партия Казахстана, Авжол и Народная партия Казахстана. Представитель оппозиционной Народной партии Казахстана в настоящее время возглавил комитет по вопросам экологии и природопользования. Другой депутат от этой партии стал заместителем председателя комитета по экономической реформе и региональному развитию. Депутат от оппозиционной партии Авжол занял пост заместителя председателя комитета по финансам и бюджету. Доля женщин-парламентариев составляет 27% от общей численности обновленного депутатского корпуса. Выступая перед депутатами нового созыва парламента, глава государства господин Токаев Касым-Жомарт Кемелевич отметил необходимость снизить порог для прохождения политических партий в Нижнюю палату парламента с 7 до 5%, а также призвал вернуть в избирательный бюллетень графу «Против всех». Благодарю за внимание.
Thank you. I then pass the floor to Ms. Friedel from Switzerland, to be followed by Mr. Gatolin from France. Ms. Friedel, please.
Herr Vorsitzender, geschätzte Kolleginnen und Kollegen, die jetzige Gesundheitskrise hat einen unübersehbaren Einfluss auf das Funktionieren unserer demokratischen Institutionen. Das macht sich auch an den Wahlurnen und bei Volksabstimmungen bemerkbar. Viele Länder mussten ihre Wahlen oder Volksbefragungen wegen gesundheitspolitischen Maßnahmen verschieben. In diesem Zusammenhang wurde die Möglichkeit zur brieflichen Stimmabgabe besonders wichtig. Die Schweiz ist das Land wahrscheinlich mit der höchsten Briefwahlquote der Welt. Fast 90% der Stimmen werden per Post abgegeben. Betrug ist extrem selten. In den letzten 40 Jahren dieser Praxis sind nur 5 Fälle bekannt, bei denen auf lokaler Ebene eine Abstimmung zu manipulieren versucht worden ist. In der Schweiz fanden im Frühling 2020 5 nationale Volksbefragungen standen an. Sie mussten aber wegen der Pandemie auf den September verschoben werden, obwohl das Abstimmungsverfahren gewährleistet gewesen wäre. Der Anlass für die Verschiebung war, dass das temporäre Versammlungsverbot, welches es verunmöglichte, Veranstaltungen zur Information und Meinungsbildung abzuhalten. Das war eine ernstzunehmende Einschränkung der Demokratie, welche kurzfristig dann durch die digitalen Kanäle aufgefangen werden konnten. Das letzte Covid-19-Jahr hat uns vor Augen geführt, wie wichtig verlässliche demokratische Instrumente sind. Das betrifft die eigentlichen Wahl- und Abstimmungsverfahren genauso wie die Möglichkeit der freien Meinungsbildung. Es muss deshalb unser größtes Ziel sein, die demokratische Teilhabe der Bevölkerung auch in Krisenzeiten sicherzustellen. Vielen Dank für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit.
Thank you. I then pass the floor to Mr. Gatolin from France, to be followed by Mr. VC from the United States. Monsieur Gatolin, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Je voudrais tout d'abord saluer et féliciter très chaleureusement Monsieur Matteo Mecacci pour sa nomination à la direction de l'ODIHR. J'ai la chance de le connaître depuis de très nombreuses années en tant que parlementaire en Italie, ses travaux à l'OSCE et aussi en tant qu'activiste de l'International Campaign for Tibet. Et il faut beaucoup de courage pour se battre pour la cause tibétaine après 60 ans toujours d'oppression sur le terrain chinois. J'ai été particulièrement, je dois dire, touché par le respect qu'il porte aux parlementaires et dans son propos liminaire, la manière dont il a insisté sur la nécessité dans ces périodes de crise, d'état d'urgence sanitaire, de laisser un contrôle permanent aux parlementaires. Parce qu'aujourd'hui, effectivement, que nous soyons dans des systèmes en voie de transition démocratique ou même dans des démocraties consolidées, la tendance des exécutifs est, face aux crises qui se multiplient, d'agir vite et souvent sans la représentation parlementaire. Et nous sommes là, effectivement, pour contrôler ce qui se passe, notamment dans une crise aussi grave que celle de la pandémie du Covid-19. Je voudrais juste pointer un point particulier qui est celui de notre expérience du confinement. Parce que s'il est une privation de liberté, c'est bien celle principale, celle de la liberté de se mouvoir, de se déplacer. Dans certains pays, en France notamment au printemps dernier, nous avons connu une incapacité pratiquement de sortir chez nous. Et je crois que ça doit nous faire réfléchir, nous, en tant que parlementaires, très intimement sur ce que représente l'enfermement, l'emprisonnement, ses impacts sur la santé mentale et réfléchir à notre système carcéral. Parce que bien sûr, la prison est là pour punir et surveiller, mais elle est aussi là pour réinsérer, réhabiliter les gens. Alors en France, nous avons eu cette réaction positive de faire sortir énormément de prisonniers qui étaient susceptibles d'être atteints du Covid-19 avec des réductions de peine. On a eu une diminution de près de 14% des gens qui étaient enfermés, ce qui nous a permis de résoudre les condamnations que nous avions de la Cour européenne des droits de l'homme, précisément à propos de la surpopulation carcérale. En Europe, plus de 100 000 prisonniers ont été notés l'an passé par rapport aux chiffres de surpopulation particulièrement élevés. Mais depuis la fin de l'année passée, nous sommes à nouveau… D'accord, je vais raccourcir. Et pour conclure, je dis il faut vraiment que nous pensions notre société dans ce contexte de liberté restreinte et notre rôle de parlementaire de protéger les libertés et les libertés de tous. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. And I would also, at this point, we will be continuing without interpretation. So on behalf of the committee, I will just extend our thanks to the interpreters. We appreciate you helping us all to understand each other. I then call Mr. Samkaradze from Georgia to be followed by Mr. Arslan. Mr. Samkaradze, please.
Thank you, Chair. Dear colleagues, first of all, I would like to thank the OSCE PA mission, election observation mission to Georgia, and Ms. Elona Hoxha for the wonderful work that they have done in Georgia in these difficult times. As it was rightly mentioned, the turnout in Georgia, despite COVID-19, was almost historically highest. 2 million people participated in the elections. And according to a new formula, which was part of the political consensus along the whole spectrum of political parties. I have to underline that the positive evaluation that came from the OSCE PA and also other international organizations gives us a stimulus and impetus to continue on reforms. And there were certain shortcomings that were underlined in the report, and I am happy to report to all of you that with the new convocation of the Parliament, the 10th convocation already started on improving the electoral framework and addressing those shortcomings that were mentioned in the report, not only the OSCE PA report, but also in the ODIHR report. And the draft law, which is already being drafted in the working group in cooperation with the international experts and local civil society organizations, will be presented to the Parliament in 10 days. So that's good news. I have to also mention the importance of gender quotas, which was the first time introduced in Georgia, and will enable in the future women politicians to participate more actively in political life. And I have to also say with regrets that some of the opposition parties still boycott the parliament. Unfortunately, in the times when the opposition got 60 seats out of 150 in the parliament of Georgia, this is also historically highest number of seats that opposition gained in the parliament, but unfortunately they are not taking up their seats. Some of the opposition parties are not taking up their seats at this moment, and it would be very unfortunate if they would continue to do so. So let me again thank the OSCE mission, and we look forward to future cooperation with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Teşekkürler. Sözü Türkiye'den Ahmet Arslan'a veriyoruz.
Mr. Arslan.
Bay Ahmet Arslan.
Minutes.
Türkiye. 2 dakikayla sınırlı konuşmanız Sayın Arslan. Buyurunuz.
For an extra
Distinguished colleagues. In the first place. However, most importantly, we would like to voice our criticism on the procedural rules of the meeting. We don't know the sequencing of the speakers, and the sequencing of the speakers is far from transparency. Some participants were given the floor, although the speaker lists were already closed, and we were not given the floor despite our requests. We kindly remind the importance of procedural rules, and we kindly request that these procedural rules be respected. And when it comes to we see that the Armenian delegation continues its defamation campaign, and it's very unfortunate and disappointing. The Swedish delegations blamings on our country are very unfortunate and disappointing, and we are astonished. We are completely rejecting these allegations and declare them ill-founded. Such ill-founded approach will not serve for the benefit of the region or the relevant country itself. Turkey believes that we can pave the way for sustainable peace and security and stability together. For that end, the Armenian government should change its attitude. We need to overcome the deep-rooted hostility and the poisoning discourse. And we firmly believe that the OSCE is constructive potential based on mutual respect can be used for a dialogue. With the COVID-19 pandemic emerging all around the world, many countries have left to postpone their political activities to uncertain dates. For this reason, politics are interrupted. Governments are taking strict measures to prevent the spread of the virus. And there are concerns that democracy will be damaged due to the bans imposed. Conducting the elections in line with OSCE commitments and reflecting the measures to reflect the governance of the will of the people is one of the most important issues. Other international organizations, including OSCE, ODIHR, are making warnings for the renormalization of the disrupted politics. And our country is taking the necessary measures and ensuring a continued operation of the political parties. In addition, in this process, human rights, immigrants, and refugee rights must be at the center of COVID-19 measures to be implemented by actors such as politicians and non-governmental organizations, and especially by the governments. It should not be forgotten that the provision of health services without discrimination of race, language, religion, sex, and access to health services under equal conditions is a necessity of human rights and democracy. While our country works to prevent the spread of the virus and reduce its impacts on the people's daily life, our country makes every effort to respond to all kinds of needs of the vulnerable segments of society, including refugees as well as our citizens. And the asylum seekers and the refugees in our country provide the necessary treatment for COVID-19 free of charge. On the 10th of January 2021, the early presidential elections in Kyrgyzstan and the parliamentary elections in Kazakhstan were successfully and peacefully held in a tranquil and peaceful atmosphere during this difficult pandemic period, and we welcome this. We congratulate the President of the Kyrgyz Republic, His Excellency Sadir Japarov, and the government formed by Prime Minister Askar Maminev. Turkey inclusiveness. On the basis of inclusiveness and social reconciliation, Turkey supports the democratic elections in every possible means. While combating the pandemic, it is necessary to protect the rights and democracy we have without losing our current values and priorities. Therefore, the participating states should be acting in a collective understanding, not just on national and individual level. Thank you very much for your interest and attention.
Thank you. I then pass the floor to Mr. Rajic from Serbia, to be followed by Mr. Dubs from the United Kingdom. Mr. Rajic, please.
Thank you. I'm pleased to address you for the first time because this is my first term as a member of parliament and as a member of OSCE delegation here from Serbia, and I would like to tell you more about how Serbia made its efforts to fight against COVID-19. As you know, the world is facing one of the most difficult challenges this year, and we are trying to fight against it on the best way we can. And I can say that I'm proud of that Serbia now is the leading country in Europe in this fight, because we are the only one in Europe who provided to its citizens all possible vaccines that we could provide from EU, UK, USA, Russia, China. And that now we are leading in Europe, and we are one of the 5 most successful countries in the world in these efforts to fight against COVID-19. Also, that fight didn't stop us in our efforts to fight for our economical success. Serbia is by far the most successful country now in a fight for its own economical development in those critical moments in Europe. And that is not something that I'm saying, that is something that MMF is saying and other reliable international financial institutions. And also, and due to this committee, it's going to be interesting for you that we provided a lot of efforts in last 12 months in order to improve our media freedoms, to improve a situation in our society. We even make up a new ministry only for social dialogue, and we are trying to overcome all problems that every society is facing with. So we could say that also for Serbian society. Also, we had a lot of success in the fight against organized crime last few weeks and months, and I believe as a member of parliament that our government and our President Vučić will lead us in that fight in the next months and years too, on that level of success as they did in the last several years. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. I then pass the floor to Lord Dubs, to be followed by Mr. Vesey from the United States. Lord Dubs.
Thank you very much indeed. Regrettably, because of the pandemic, we were not able from the UK go on any of these election monitoring missions, although in my experience, they are some of the most useful work we've been able to do. So I very much hope in the future that'll be possible. I'd therefore like to make 1 or 2 comments, one particularly about the earlier discussion in this committee. I very much welcomed the Carrie Henriksen's comments and her 5 points, particularly about migration and also about the effect of the of the pandemic on human rights. It's coincidentally something that the Human Rights Committee at Westminster, which I'm a member, is actually looking at the moment. And on Wednesday, we took evidence both from lawyers and from the police about what action they were taking as regards the pandemic. But could I just turn to one other point, more suitable perhaps for the agenda in Bucharest? Quite often, and I heard it yesterday, people are saying that is interference in our internal affairs. And it seems to me that is said when people don't like the point. If they do like the point, they never mention it. And I do think we need to get hold of this as an issue, because most of the things we do are in fact, in one way or another, comments on or interference in the internal affairs of other countries. Otherwise, how can we have human rights or democracy or humanitarian questions? Election monitoring itself is an interference in the human rights of other countries. So I think we should stop using that as an excuse. I'll just say, we don't argue that although it's not an OSCE country, we don't argue that the human rights abuses in Myanmar shouldn't ever be discussed. And nor do we say Islamophobia, racism, anti-Semitism, or LGBT rights should not be discussed, even though they interfere in other countries, or the death penalty, or Guantanamo. So the whole range of issues which we talk about frequently, which do involve interference in other countries, and that is right, because that's what human rights are all about. I think that point needs more discussion, and perhaps we can do it in Bucharest.
Thank you. I then pass the floor to Mr. Visi, to be followed by Mr. Ederholt, also of the United States. Mr. Visi, please.
Thank you very much. And I want to say thank you for OSCE PA election observation missions during the unprecedented challenging times of the pandemic in particular. OSCE election observations are an expression of our support for free and fair elections and strengthening democracy throughout the OCSC region. The reports offer a very important perspective from observers who rightly care about the process and not the result. The United States is one of 5 countries where the OSCE was able to observe 3 elections during the pandemic. I take the conclusions and recommendations, including criticisms in this election report, very seriously. Americans raise and debate among themselves the same issues discussed that are in this report today. It will help serve as a useful and helpful guide on what steps we should take to improve our electoral system. I welcome the opportunity to discuss the recommendations further, and I believe our election officials and state legislators should also read this report. I similarly recommend it to any American who cares about his or her country. It is a broad snapshot of our entire electoral complex system that we have here. And let me just touch on a few of the issues raised. First and foremost, as we prepare for elections again in 2022 and presidential in 2024, I hope we can encourage improved access for OSCE and citizen election observers in our decentralized system. And that's very key that we have a decentralized system here. The situation of access varies from one state to another, but the overall trend should be moving closer to the spirit of our OSCE commitments. Our second, as the founder of the Congressional Voting Rights Caucus here, I've worked to expand voter enfranchisement and ease voter access, including through mail-in voting. Mail-in voting increases the ability of people to exercise the right to vote. This is especially important during a pandemic, but our system still has considerable room for improvement. If anything, the insurrection at the U.S. Capitol on January the 6th has reinforced my commitment to improving our electoral system, to increasing voter enfranchisement, and securing elections. And I look forward to maintaining our dialogue so we can continue the best ways how to address this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I will then pass the floor to Mr. Ederholt, the former vice chair of this committee as well, to be followed by Ms. Bochorashvili from Georgia. Mr. Ederholt, please.
Yes, thank you. It's good to be with you today, and we miss seeing all of our colleagues in person, but I'm glad we could get together in this format today and this week, and so it's great to join you. Let me just welcome all the speakers that spoke today, and I especially want to say hello to Director Makachi who I worked with years ago at the OSCE, and glad to see his role at ODIHR. Press freedom in the OSCE region, of course, has continued to decline as some governments are using economic, legal, and extra legal tools to silence independent media and also to bolster loyal outlets. And dozens of journalists are imprisoned in the OSCE region. We have seen that in Russia, we've seen it in Belarus, we've seen that in Turkey, detaining scores of journalists in recent national protest. And I would just like to call this attention to the Free Media Representative Ribeiro, and to encourage them to hold these countries to the free media commitments that they have, and to make sure that they do everything they can to make sure that this does not happen in the future, and it's that we can see something done about this. Also, I'd like to also address again Director Makachi, and in the name of combating COVID, some participating states have totally banned significantly or limited public worship that impacts the freedom of religion or belief, while less restrictive when it comes to businesses, when it comes to rallies and other public events. And I would like to know that ODIHR will continue to monitor this, review this, report and engage in anything that to make sure that these participating states are complying with OSCE commitments on freedom of religion and belief. So I want to throw these issues out there. I think they need to be addressed, and this is a very pertinent during this time. And I thank you for giving me the time.
Thank you. I then pass the floor to Ms. Bochodashvili from Georgia, to be followed by Mr. Guliev of Azerbaijan. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will first of all thank Alona for her report and my colleague who already briefed about the elections in Georgia. And not to repeat, I will just touch a couple of topics. First of all, it's really noteworthy that beside the challenges that post-pandemics, authorities managed to organize well-administered elections last year. So a couple of things should be mentioned. Prior to these elections, very important constitutional changes were adopted, which allowed new electoral system to work, and with the lowering threshold to 14 political parties were elected in the parliament. So it's ensured more pluralistic, created ground for more pluralistic representation in the parliament. So that was very important changes and kind of created good ground to move to fully proportional system by 2024. Another thing, I will not repeat the general assessment of the elections, which was already voiced. I will focus on the work of working group, which was created after elections to work on shortcomings of the elections and to elaborate the changes on the basis of OSCE preliminary recommendation. We are still looking forward to final report for further consideration, but I will just highlight a couple of things what we are going to address with these changes. First, it is about reforming the composition of Central Election Commission, introducing new election technologies, and reviewing norms of use of administrative resources and election dispute resolution. So these are very important changes that we will be introducing. Of course, as soon as we finish work on drafts, it will be submitted to ODIHR for its expertise. So that is in short that I wanted to say to complement what was already said about the elections in Georgia, which was held in October 2020. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I will just interrupt before handing the floor to Mr. Guliev. Ms. Ribeiro has to leave in 1 moment, but she would just quickly like to respond. Please, Ms. Ribeiro, to be followed by Mr. Guliev.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, I still have another appointment, so I have to leave the session. But in any case, I would like also to share my concerns that were voiced also by Mr. Adalt from the US regarding the state of freedom of expression and media freedom in the OSCE region. My work is, of course, to remind all the participating states that freedom of expression and media freedom are among the principles and commitments of this organization, and so the participating states are obliged to comply with those principles and commitments. That's what I would like very much to say. Of course, safety of journalists is at the top of my priorities, because if you don't have journalists and journalists that are properly doing their work, then of course the information that we as citizens get will be not the one we deserve and not the one we need to be to be better citizens and to participate in a better way in our democratic life. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I then pass the floor to Mr. Guliev from Azerbaijan, to be followed by Ms. Karapetyan from Armenia, please. Mr. Guliev.
Thank you very much, dear Andres, dear colleagues. To be honest, I plan to speak about the item number 7 of the agenda, but our colleagues from Belgium and Sweden with their intervention made me change my speech and respond to their groundless and baseless accusations against my country. Dear colleagues, if you are interested in committed war crimes during the 44-day war, I can give the list of concrete examples of such crimes of Armenia. First, the cities of Azerbaijan situated far away from the conflict zone were targeted using the international banned Scud missiles and cluster munitions, which caused the killing of more than 100 civilians and wounding nearly 500 people. By the way, Armenia is the first OSCE state which has used the international banned Scud missiles against another member country. Second, Armenia inhumanly treated and tortured the Azerbaijani war prisoners. I have many facts and I can share them with you too. Third, in the course of the conflict, Armenia resorted to the services of the terrorists from the Middle East, particularly the member of the PKK and Asala, against Azerbaijan. In opposite, due to its military capacity and modern infrastructure, Azerbaijan didn't have any need in the services of mercenaries. Four, by refusing to submit the map of minefield to Azerbaijan, Armenia directly caused the deaths and wounding of dozens of Azerbaijani civilians. Five, after ending of conflict, Armenia sent a separatist group to Azerbaijan, which killed the 4 Azerbaijani servicemen and wounded 1 civilian. All these facts are the obvious violations of Armenia's international obligations and provisions of the 10 November trilateral statement. I invite you to look into and review these issues. If you are interested, I am ready to cooperate and discuss all these issues you have concern. In conclusion, I would like to state that Armenia and its supporters should draw the necessary conclusions and lessons from the 44-day war and try to contribute to the peace established after the 10 November 2020. If they are unwilling or unable to do so, then I would recommend them to be in line with the statements and the international commitments. Also, at least stop making such provocations and spreading disinformation against Azerbaijan. The provocative claims and activities will never bring any benefit to neither of the parties. Thank you, dear Chair.
Thank you. I then pass the floor to Ms. Karapetyan from Armenia, to be followed by Ms. McPhedran from Canada. Ms. Karapetyan, please.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, I want to thank Mark Demesmaker of Belgium and Björn Söder of Sweden for openly and directly addressing the issue of Armenian detainees in Azerbaijan and the war in Nagorno-Karabakh. All they have done is condemning war as a way to resolve conflicts, and they have also called for humanitarian law to be respected under all circumstances. This can only be applauded to and cannot meet criticism. The authorities of Azerbaijan and the Azerbaijani delegation here in the Parliamentary Assembly have said during the previous sessions that the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict is over and we should move on, and they are in the phase of post-conflict rehabilitation. Yet, they continue blocking international humanitarian aid to Nagorno-Karabakh. The OSCE Minsk Group co-chairs and other actors say, no, the conflict is not resolved yet. The status of Nagorno-Karabakh is not resolved yet, and we're far from a situation of sustainable peace in the South Caucasus. Not only Azerbaijan has breached the principle of non-use of force to resolve what it sees solely as a territorial dispute, disregarding the human rights dimension that underlies the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, but it also calls for people's rights to self-determination, an obsolete and outdated issue. Colleagues from Azerbaijan say they have captured some of the soldiers after the war, so the agreement of returning the detainees under the all-for-all principle does not apply to them. This means that the authorities of Azerbaijan disregard the Geneva Conventions. In the meantime, 2 Azerbaijani servicemen had crossed the border with Armenia after the war as well, and we returned them to Azerbaijan. We also returned to Azerbaijan the convicts that had been serving their sentences from before the Second War. To conclude, I once again call for all of us to work with our foreign ministers to demand from Azerbaijan to return the Armenian detainees. We cannot move on before all of them come home. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I then pass the floor to Ms. McPhedran from Canada, please.
Thank you, Third Committee rapporteurs, particularly Carrie Henriksen, for the 5 guiding priorities, and appreciation to all speakers today. Honorable colleagues, voting is a democratic right. How do we keep people safe while voting during a pandemic, when risks are much greater for certain citizens? As we adapt our voting procedures to our new reality, we need intersectional analysis to ensure the integrity of the vote and to make sure we are not increasing barriers to voting or increasing risk of voting corruption. For example, individuals living in long-term care facilities have the right to safely and fairly vote. So election workers must not be moving among multiple facilities on election day. As we have already heard, mail-in ballots and telephone voting are viable alternatives. Proposed legislation in Canada allows 13 days to administer the vote in long-term care facilities. People with disabilities also hold the right to vote. Barriers need to be taken down through means like Braille and audible signage and priority access lines for individuals who cannot stand in line for long. Indigenous people in Canada, particularly in remote communities, also face voting barriers. Public education in various Indigenous languages about mail-in options will be crucial. Nearly half of election workers in the last Canadian election were over 60, at greater risk of COVID-19. The bill I mentioned proposes a 3-day voting period instead of the usual 1 day, including a weekend. Changes made to the Canada Elections Act in 2018 reduced the age to be an election worker to 16. It's time we re-examined electoral laws and learned from Austria's success in lowering the voting age to 16 in 2007. Vote young, vote long, I say. My bill currently in the Senate of Canada notes that voting at an earlier age makes them voters for the rest of their lives. Please share your experiences with me in your country if you've debated or implemented a lower voting age. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we have one last addition. Mr. Arslan, for 1 minute, please. I understand you wanted to respond to something. Please, Mr. Arslan.
colleagues, in fact, upgrading democracy has always been a priority in our agenda. In fact, we attach special importance to the judiciary and fundamental rights and freedoms. In fact, there is an active and pluralist media community in Turkey that is benefiting from our internal law, international obligations, and also the case law of the ECHR. The individual cases that are also related to the freedom of expression are seen by independent and impartial courts. So journalism or any other profession cannot be used as a shield against criminal investigations, and more than in fact, manipulating any profession for the intention of committing a crime is against the principles of violation. So we reject the criticism against our country in this regard, and in fact, the independent justice is running efficiently in Turkey, and everyone's right for fair trial is in fact secured. If there is any journalist that is detained, in fact, they are not under detention or arrested because of their speech or journalism, but they are arrested or detained because of other crimes. So they cannot use the profession of journalism as an excuse, and they are not free to commit crimes with that pretext. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the debate on this item. So I pass the floor back to Chairman Hajiani, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Andreas. And thank you, colleagues, for an interesting and engaging debate. This has been a big topic we have tried to address today. There are no easy solutions, but I hope that we have all benefited from the discussion. These topics must be debated in an open manner, and we should all be ready to hear criticism also of our own countries. I will now ask if our guest speakers would like to respond briefly to the debate. Mr. McCarthy, would you like to respond to any of the debate?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I will do that gladly and briefly. I want to thank, first of all the special coordinators who conducted the election observations over the last 6 months. Thank you also for your appreciation of the work that has been done with ODIHR, and we really look forward to increase and strengthen our cooperation moving forward. I also want to thank my colleagues Michael, Andre, and Robert for their best wishes to me, and to Mr. Aderholt, thank you for raising the question of religious freedom. I didn't have time to delve into it in my presentation, but actually in our report, we have reported extensively on limitations which have been imposed also religious freedom, and in some cases also discrimination, which has been highlighted. So certainly this is an issue which is dear to me and to the work I have done over many years. So I look forward to continue to pay attention to that. Thank you all for your kind words, and look forward really to continue to work.
Thank you very much, and hope for further cooperation as we used to do it all these years. So, and now to our rapporteur, Kari, would you like to respond to any of the debate, Kari? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for a very fruitful and interesting debate. And each and every one of you have been raising issues that is important for me in my further work with the report. I just want to have some comments. First to Russia, Mrs. Sivayenko, who was bringing up the other issues regarding gender. It's not only about counting women and men, but it's also about the social and economic issues. That I fully agree with you. And to Mr. Aycan from Turkey, and also to US member Aderholt, they were bringing up two issues that is kind of similar. The one is the anti-Semitism and the rise of the extreme attitudes towards other people in regarding to their belief or their skin. And Mr. Aderholt also brought up the differences in many countries regarding the restrictions on business the business family in the one hand and the religious family on the other hand. And also in my country, that is a big discussion. So I think that is an important issue to go further on. And to Mr. Mamiko from Belarus and Mr. Dobbs in Great Britain, I just have to say that I fully agree with Mr. Dobbs. I think that in our family, in the OSCE, we need to exchange the views and exchange how we think about politics and how we think about human rights to develop our own countries from inside, our international collaborations and the international bodies, but also to develop the OSCE policy. So I would just want to say that when we as a member of OSCE and we have in the Human Rights Committee have invited us to have dialogue with countries, it is to expand our views and our horizons to make better understanding. It's not about interfering and giving someone right or wrong, but it's to develop policy together in the big family. I just wanted to state that point. And I would also like to address Mrs. Hedy Fry and also Mr. Gattolin from France, because they were also talking about the need for the focus on the institutions so that they are not cracking in this pandemic and that we can build them resilient when we are starting our work to get rid of these COVID restrictions and are in a way building our new societies from the bottom up again. So I just want to say that I think that is also a very important issue, and it was also something that Matteo Makatsi was pointing at, that the findings in his study was that there were some lack of political strategies regarding the law development in the countries. It was weakened. I think that was the word he used. And I think that is very much something that we would place in our minds, and we have to address that kind of trends. Margareta put forward the vaccine and education for also migrants, and I think that's very important. We are risking that a whole generation of migrant youth are without education. That's a very important issue to bring up, that they need to have the education as long side by side with the need for healthcare and also, of course, the vaccine. So I just want to thank you again for your important input, and I will now work further on this report so that we can have a thorough discussion in the next meeting of the OSCE and in the third committee. Thank you.
Thanks, dear Kari. I want to thank also Mr. Makachi and also Ms. Ribeiro. And thank you all of you for this discussion. Let's move to the last item of the agenda, any other business. I see no additional business, so I hereby close this meeting. Thank you all for participating. Closing this meeting, on behalf of the entire committee, I would like to thank our close associate, Andreas Baker. Andreas is our close collaborator, but also an excellent technocrat who knows in depth the issues of human rights, humanitarian affairs, and democracy. We are very happy to have your support and cooperation, dear Andreas. Thank you, and thank you all of you. Have a good time. Bye.
Right.